What's up, everybody? It's Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads, and with me I have Jake Payne, our editor-in-chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline podcast. What's going on, man?
Yo, man, what's going on? It's we are now in the high holidays, and I don't think we realized what kind of week this was going to be. But we behind the scenes made some alterations to talk about some really important stuff, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We were all set to do our year-end wrap-up. Even though we got a month, we always go back and forth on what the timing is for this, because if you wait too late, then it's the holidays and nobody's paying attention. If you go too early, then inevitably somebody drops something off that's dope. So it's always a balance. But as the cycle goes, we hip hop had other plans for us. I'll be fully transparent. I did not get to witness this moment live, but Jake was watching real time. And we've covered a lot of verses over the years, a bunch of them. And typically we go round for round, score. Jake and I debate. We talk about the moments. This one was different than any other verses that we've seen thus far, and so we're going to cover it differently. But with that said, Jake. So first of all, I want to ask you. So the reason why I didn't watch it is I'm a Bone fan. I'm from the Midwest. But really, it was Easy E that got me into Bone. I'm at my core a New York and a West Coast dude,
Hmm.
and so Midwest for me was Chicago. South for me was Atlanta, but I'm talking Outkast, Jermaine Dupri, that kind of stuff, and also Houston with Ghetto Boys, Scarface, stuff like that. I was never really into the Memphis sound. I didn't. It just kind of bypassed me. Nothing against it, it just wasn't what was super pleasing to my ear, nor the New Orleans sound. So like the whole Cash Money, No Limit thing kind of passed me by. I love Currency, I love Jay Electronica, so sort of the second generation of New Orleans cats. But it seems to me that you were actually like a significant fan of both. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I lived it. I mean, my coming of age hip hop story. While I knew hit records and I knew the Young MCs and the Raw Basses and the Sir Mix-a-Lots, those crossover records. For me, the big breakthrough year was like 95, 96. And boom, I mean, you are 95, of course, is the year we lost Easy E. E99 comes out, the Bone Thugs-N-Harmony, even though they had put out the EP in 94, that was a takeover. And like you, I mean, it's funny. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you say that's Midwest, some people will say, no, that's closer to the East Coast. Obviously, it's not coastal. Um, to me, it's Rust Belt. And, I grew up less than 2 hours from downtown Cleveland. I grew up going to Cleveland. My mom, I had family there. I spent a lot of time in Cleveland growing up. And, up in the 90s, apart from like Sam Snead and Melman and a few people, Pittsburgh didn't have rap representation. So to watch these guys from Cleveland blow up the way that they did, I absolutely was a fan. And then when you went into record stores in Pittsburgh, they had everything. I mean, all the Mo Thugs, all the side projects, the bootlegs, all of that. So absolutely on that front, I'm probably closer to you on the Memphis scene. One of the first free CDs I ever got as a writer when I was a teenager was from Kingpen Skinny Pimp, which is one of the Memphis OGs. But it really took me until the mid 2000s to appreciate to the fullest 3-6 Mafia, 8 Ball MJG, a lot of that Memphis sound. And today I listen to it quite a bit. I listen to Houston, like you, Big Dungeon Family Guy. I like what's happening out of Miami. I think we're probably the same on New Orleans. That continues to be a journey for me, bounce music. But there's a lot to love there. But yeah, that I was definitely a Bone fan first and a 3-6 Mafia fan, later in life in my 20s.
Yeah, when Creeping on a Come Up came out, you said 94.
Mm-hmm.
That was incredible to me. I think it was 4 songs, it was an EP, but For the Love of Money and Thuggish Ruggish Bone were my joints. I just ran those back to back to back. And again, that to me was an extension of West Coast. If you listen to it, it's got a G-Funk sound to it.
Mm-hmm.
The low end bass line with the high end synth on top of it. So it was for me a really easy bridge into it. For 3-6, I'll say that, similar to you, I wasn't really paying close attention to their catalog, but as I watched this Verzuz, I was surprised by how much of their stuff that I knew. I knew Tear the Club Up. I knew a lot of stuff. I didn't know it by name, but
Mhm.
as soon as it came on, I was like, oh, and they had a different kind of energy. I got a good friend, actually a friend of AFH, Brian Calhoun, who is a massive 3-6 fan, and he was a DJ back in the day, and used to always talk to me about it. And watching this Verzuz, I saw the energy. When they said tear the club up, he said, "Yo, for like a year or so, every single time that song came on, they were tearing the club."
Yeah.
Like it was, so you guys talking, my guy might be talking soon too.
Yeah, my dogs are ready to tear the club up
Yeah,
too.
exactly. That's what this does, man. This is wild. So, I was surprised pleasantly by how much I knew. And then, actually, Bone Thugs, and we'll get into that a little bit, actually went deeper into the catalog than I expected to. But, I was rocking with them hard those first two projects. So, Crossroads, obviously, the Biggie stuff, like, I'd say from 94 to like 97 or so, they were like really, really, really running things, and, I watched Fat Joe and he described Bizzy Bone as like the Michael Jackson of hip hop. And we'll get into that in a minute, but I wouldn't go quite that far, but Bone was definitely, and Crossroads was a smash. I don't think people understand. I think it was on #1 for like 14 weeks with Mariah. Yeah, it was Crossroads, yeah, and then Breakdown too with Mariah Carey, also huge. So their impact cannot be underestimated. But so you're watching, and what was your expectation going in?
We had talked about this twice on the What's the Headline podcast. Once when it first announced, and then they found a later date, and then once again in passing. Both times we've mentioned it. I don't know if we've given it collectively 10 minutes of airtime. I think we both kind of made a forecast, and that was that. And this Versus, is running in the high holidays. Came on a Thursday night. You're again going against NFL football. It was Dallas Cowboys, which a lot of people, that's quote unquote America's team. And for me, it wasn't something that I had planned 100% to watch, but I pay attention to what's being said on Twitter. I was like, yo, I want to check this out. I want to see what this looks like. I want to see, first of all, is it going to be all the members of Bone? You just mentioned Bizzy Bone right there. Bizzy's status with Bone Thugs-N-Harmony is very much in and out of the group throughout, for much of the last 25 years. On top of it, 3-6 Mafia has suffered 2 deaths, with Kumsta and Lord Infamous. And a lot of people associate the group with DJ Paul, Juicy J. But I was curious, is Gangsta Boo going to show up? Is Project Pat, who's an affiliate, is he going to show up? So I started to watch for that. And then, I used to subscribe to Murder Dog magazine. Did you ever read Murder Dog?
Yeah, a couple times, not a ton. If
I
I
mean,
remember correctly, there were a lot of grammatical errors and typos and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, shout out. They were a DIY magazine, but they covered a lot of just, I'm gonna use the word gangster rap, and that doesn't really do justice, but they covered a lot of Midwest, a lot of Bay Area, a lot of West Coast stuff that wasn't always getting love in the source and rap pages. And both of these groups are emblematic of that. So I was a Murder Dog subscriber,
Well, actually, hang on. Let me apologize to Murder Dog because my recollection of the typos was really about Feds. Remember,
word.
Feds had a lot of typo, but it was just straight. It was straight from the streets and made no pretense about it. So my
Yeah.
apologies, to Murder Dog. I won't speak on their grammar and spelling.
Yeah, no, I mean Murder Dog was cool, and I mean there's spelling and grammar in a lot of publications. I know, even AFH, we've had some people over the years call us out for different articles, but it reminded me I was a Murder Dog subscriber, and this battle very much spoke to that fan in me. And I started watching, and in the early rounds, it was sort of like a Stanley Kubrick film. I couldn't look away. And, as we talk about this, I'll be very honest. I'll be very candid about this was not my favorite Versus. I think that the Locks and Dipset, the Locks particularly set a new bar that I'm going to hold every Versus competitor to in terms of rehearsal, in terms of stage performance. And this one was not even close. but there was a lot of entertainment and there was a lot of just nostalgia for me. And there was a lot to appreciate about this. And then obviously, you know, the story that a lot of people that probably weren't tuned in had to do with the fight. You know, I looked at the numbers, and when I first tuned in, it was before the Verzuz began. When I tuned in, it was DJ Position, who is Bone Thugs DJ, and Felly Fell, who I don't believe is 3-6, you know, full-time DJ, but Felly Fell is a legend of LA radio and a producer. I've done some work with Felly Fell years ago, and they were kind of hyping the crowd up. And, you know, Swizz was in the comments saying, you know, I'm really sorry, this is running late, you know, this, that, and the third. Snoop Dogg is like, come on, man. Killer Mike's in there saying he's excited. So I tuned in, and then the moment it was around 125,000 were tuned in, and I watched it on IG Live off the Verzuz account. And then after the fight, which we will spend some time talking about, it was more than double that.
Word. So I watched Fat Joe's recap, and he was in the building, and he said part of the reason why they had the delay is because neither Bone nor 3-6 was willing to go first, and they wanted Fat Joe to do the coin toss. He says he was the only person in the building that they trusted to do it. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's definitely extensive history between him and all of them, and because of the Relativity Records relationship. So that's the story. I suspect it's more complicated than that. You know, probably a few people late. You know, a few people like, you know, teetering at, you know, deciding whether they're going to come, the whole nine. But in any case, it started late. But before we get into the Verzuz, let's set the stage for it, because these two groups have been around. You know, I think 3-6 has been around longer, I believe, around the same era, you know, close enough. But they've had a history, a joint history that's tied them together, and one that's created tension. So you want to break that down?
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I think of Verzuz, and this, you know, obviously the fight brought a lot of attention to this battle. And I wish in a way this was a reminder of why Verzuz is fun. You know, the one other time that I think there's been any definitive beef was you know, Young Jeezy versus Gucci Mane, which, you know, was a huge battle. It wasn't one that I was terribly excited about, just because I'm not a super fan of either of those guys. I don't have the history and the growing up years that I do with both of these acts. But yeah, I mean, 1995, you're talking about the way the Crossroads kind of dominated. And 94 too, you know, Eazy-E, who was, I feel like, you know, at a time when Death Row had kind of thumbed its nose at Eazy-E, Ice Cube had moved on and found great success on his own. And what was Ruthless Records going to be? And they put out a ton of projects, a bunch of different groups, you know, including At Band Clan, which, you know, eventually evolved into Black Eyed Peas or Will.i.am. They put out Cocaine, who, you know, made great records with Snoop. And then this group out of Cleveland that had all taken Greyhounds to LA. And I think that sometimes the narrative is that Bone Thugs-N-Harmony was, you know, Eazy knew that this was going to be a hit. And I don't believe that. I have a lot of friends that worked with Eazy-E, a lot of people I know that were at Ruthless Records as employees and staff over the years. I've interviewed, I think, just about every member of Bone, give or take Wish. I don't think I've ever interviewed Wishbone. And I don't think it was quite that way. I think the group really kind of dug out some early hits on that EP. They sounded new and different. They were Midwest, had a baked-in fan base like that. But it took off, it worked. And as that happened, you had a group like 3-6 Mafia that had been doing it for approximately 5 years. And from what I understand, the tensions kind of started out of, well, you guys are kind of doing these tongue-twisting deliveries over slow, menacing beats. There's a lot of imagery to kind of the occult, like, you know, Ouija boards and, you know, the dead, you know, some macabre shit. And there was a real kind of tension there. And, you know, our colleague and friend Justin Hunt, who is there's two people in my life that I know that are diehard Bone Thugs-N-Harmony fans to the fullest. My uncle Dan, who regularly tunes into this podcast and owns every single bootleg, independent release, spinoff, whatever, and then Justin. And Justin was in the building Thursday night. So he interviewed DJ Paul in 2015 for Hip Hop DX when Justin, was EIC there. And Paul said that, it wasn't really like a flat out beef, but there was tension. There was kind of that biting attitude that we see time and time again in hip hop. You can talk about K Solo and DMX over the Letterman style. You can talk about, just on and on of who created what, even recently, like Kanye West and Just Blaze over, who really gave the blueprint its sound. This conversation exists, and, Bone Thugs finds mainstream recognition, and 3-6 Mafia hadn't yet. And so there were jabs, and 3-6 Mafia, even put out a song in 95. What is it called? Rep Your Hood. I have the title slightly off, but they came out and dissed these guys, and I'm sure they ran into each other, from what I understand, at your Gavins or your Jack the Rappers, and there was a standoff, maybe some words exchanged or a push or a shove. But by the late 90s, both groups have moved on, and that was that. And one of the things I'll say is it's worth mentioning, because the score was never really settled. It was never a beef to the extent of Jeezy and Gucci, but there's tension. And it's like, who did it first? Who did it better? Who did more with it? And there were 3 different times throughout the Verzuz on Thursday night where both from the 3-6 side, and I think Lazy Bone said it on the Bone side, this battle was 26 years in the making. Mm-hmm. And I love that. That's why Verzuz exists, because, it's not definitive of like who walks away with the win sets history straight, but very clearly these guys were invested in getting their flowers. So what better stage?
And a lot of parallels too, both coming from markets that were not established in hip hop at that point, both with styles that weren't respected by, New York, which was still at that time kind of the pinnacle of hip hop. In fact, I was living in New York at the time, which is part of the reason why I didn't catch either one of them as much, because, simultaneously that's the bad boy era. You got Nas doing his thing, Jay is starting to come up. Like New York is definitely on top, especially of commercial hip hop at that point. And so you have these upstarts, and I say that, quote unquote, who are coming from, mid-sized markets, not a ton of radio play. Well, Bone had a ton of radio play at that point, but like when they were coming up, they're not getting the kind of support that an emerging artist get. They had to fight and make it on their own. And, even once they didn't get the respect, you and I wrote we wrote an article, put out an article a few years ago. And this was actually in defense of the current generation, or, the then current generation of so-called mumble rappers, which has evolved into melodic rap now. But the argument was that Bone Thugs-N-Harmony were actually the first mumble rappers. They were artists who had a really distinctive flow that was not super clear unless you understood the slang, unless you understood their accents. It just kind of all blended together and sounded like just kind of mumbling. But that wasn't to put Bone down. It was to establish the current generation and make people a bit more accepting, because people obviously love Bone, especially in our audience. But I think they have a lot more in common than they had differences. And to your point, some of those things became so much in common that they took offense that people were copying.
Yeah, there was a great article we ran on the site on the triplet style, the Migos flow being a derivative of both groups, but especially Bone. And, we've watched Bone and Migos go at it, Lazy Bone in particular, with these guys, over that, that same question of biting. And, Twista obviously deserves mention in that too, of that fast rap. Tech Nine, has called it chopping, but that not a stutter style, because that's more like Fushnik and Dawes Effects and early Jay-Z, but that exactly what you're saying, that like tongue twisting style. And absolutely, and
also on the same record label, right? And we've seen and it would seem that people who are on the same label would be collaborators, and in most instances that's the case. But we've also seen times where it turns into a competition, and that could be business, that they're both competing for probably a finite pot of resources for music videos and promotion and things like that. And so the top dog is going to get that. I think that the biggest and potentially most dangerous example we've seen of that has been Trippie Redd and Tekashi 6ix9ine. That one ended in gunplay at times. But Yeah, that's another commonality they had. So you said that you had interviewed everyone in Bone with the exception of Wishbone. What was your coverage of 3-6 like?
Yeah, over the years, I've spoken to DJ Paul and Juicy J separately, never together that I can recall. I've coordinated interviews for others, but yeah, and I've I was once in a party in Atlanta at Tree Sound Studios, which is a phenomenal studio, and Gangsta Boo was in the same room. Actually, Mickey Fax, who we had on the show, there was a bunch of people. So I've talked to Gangsta Boo, not in a professional manner, but that's it. I don't think I've ever interviewed Project Pat. But when I've covered these guys, it was in the late 2000s, so they had already found their most known unknown success in 2006. They'd had the Oscar, they'd won the Grammy. At this point, they're on VH1, and they, both groups, as you talk about parallel paths, both groups have had these huge records, and then they've gone and they've done these independent projects throughout their whole career, mixtapes and street albums and all of that. And they both are very dedicated to their fan base. But I've definitely spent more time interviewing Bone Thugs. In 2005, I wanted to do a 10-year retrospective because it had been 10 years since Eazy-E died. And, I got on the phone with Bone, Steve Lobel, who was with them, during Verzuz. We had a really meaningful conversation, and Bizzy, who, like I said, has an estranged status with the group, participated and gave me phenomenal quotes. And that story was for all hip hop. And I hope it's still online. It was a really good retrospective.
That's dope. So they also had similarities in terms of like internal, I won't say strife, but like issues that threaten to like really compromise the group. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, both groups have personnel issues. You look at the 3-6 timeline, and it's at the core, it's Juicy J and DJ Paul, but they've had folks come in and out, folks that they'll do stuff with and then disappear and come back. And that's why, again, I tuned in. I was like, what is this group going to look like? And it was dope that Gangsta Boo was there. It was great that Project Pat came out. Crunchy Black, I never realized, I have to say for a moment, what a phenomenal hype man he was. And we'll talk about that. But you've had people coming in and out, and both groups have had a whole host of challenges. There's been infighting. Bizzy Bone's status with the group has led to some really high profile for fans interviews where they've dissed each other. 2018, we ran it on Ambrosia for Heads. It got a lot of SEO this week. DJ Paul dissed Juicy J. I mean, Juicy J gets a resurgence that Paul doesn't necessarily enjoy over the last 10 years, becomes part of Taylor Gang, is on the Katy Perry record, really gets second life. And I liken it, and it might even be even bigger than like Bun B had. And DJ Paul,
Bands Will Make Her Dance was gigantic. That was in my 106 and Park days. And I remember we had a discussion about whether or not to play the video, because if you remember, it had this stripper who was on like a seemingly infinite pole, and it was very, very racy video at the time. But Juicy J, like he, in some ways he had more exposure than 3-6 did, in that like 2010s era.
Yeah. And it's sad too, because he and Paul and Crunchy had done all this work, getting the Oscar, getting a Grammy, doing all of that stuff around 2005, 2006. And they did a VH1 show together. I remember tuning in. And then Juicy J just kind of takes the ball and goes beyond. And that's why Paul dissed him in 18. He's like, you don't look back. Paul, finds a lot of the other members and kind of creates this group called the Mafia. Bone Thugs has dealt with that too. They've released albums, sometimes with Flesh, sometimes without Flesh, sometimes with Bizzy, without. There've been a lot of starts and stops. And what's crazy to me is Bone Thugs, at the same time that 3-6 Mafia gets their accolades, Swizz Beatz, co-founder of Verzuz, comes in and reunites Bone Thugs-N-Harmony for Strength and Loyalty, gets them a deal through his imprint at Interscope, and puts out an album that goes to #2 on the charts in, I want to say, 2007. An album I really enjoyed. I mean, it doesn't have that Eazy-E feel to it, but it creates a new life for these guys. And then immediately after it, they already kind of start to dissipate. On 3-6's side, obviously, I mentioned the two deaths. these groups have just had a host of label woes, of problems. And that's why, again, I was excited for Verzuz, because one thing that we've seen is this gives a chance for people to tune in, appreciate the catalog, show a lot of love to these artists. And even in spite of what happened Thursday night, I do think we're seeing that. I know over the week, man, I've been playing more Bone Thugs and 3-6 Mafia than I've played in months, maybe years.
Yeah. So you've alluded to the fight a number of times, and I think you were one of the first one. You in watching it real time. You were one of the first ones to break it. You know, I had seen, you know, for the audience, Justin Hunt, who's AFH family, and Jake and I have a group chat that we get into every once in a while. And they had started texting about the Verzuz. I had forgotten that it was happening, but then my ears kind of peaked up. I tuned in for a second, but the numbers were around what you had said, so it must have been.
Yeah, man, you left us on red, man.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, it had been a long week, dog. I was ready for bed.
Yeah.
Um, and so I didn't find out about this until the next morning. I wake up and you know I check the site's analytics, and our numbers are like through the charts. And so I look at Facebook, and I see that Jake has posted this story. But before we get into it, I wanna talk about Verzuz a bit more generally. So we've seen, like you said, a lot of Verzuz and some that had real high stakes coming in, notably the Jeezy and the Gucci Mane one. I mean, those guys, you know, were really about it at one point. There were many times actually during the Locks versus Dipset that I thought, uh-oh, it's really about to pop off now, because you got a lot of guys on stage. There's a lot of testosterone. They kept trying to clear it, so clearly it was more people than it was supposed to be. And it felt like a throwback to those like 90s era days where the crew was out there, and like, you know, it's always the crews that start shit, right? And so, but, you know, and, you know, there have been other, and hip hop in general is an aggressive genre. Verzuz has been alternately celebratory, and but alternately competitive too, even Fat Joe. And so Lots and Dipset, like you said, kind of like set the bar. They took it from let's celebrate each other and arm around each other and hugs and everything and drink together and sit and smile, to know this is a competition. Let's really go after it. And you know, Fat Joe and Ja Rule did the same thing. They're good friends, and you know, they coordinated it and they were strategic about it. Lots and Dipset also were coordinated in the sense that they were going on tour. They had announced that they were going to have a national tour right after that. So the last thing they wanted to do was to screw up that bag by fighting and like not being able to tour together. As is the case, you know, a lot of times after something's happened, it's a game of telephone, and the message gets mixed up, and you know, people only see the rivalry and don't understand the strategy behind it. So I'm curious, are you surprised that something like this has not popped off? Are you surprised there hasn't been another fight in Verzuz before?
I thought we got really close with Locks and Dipset, and you and I did a great podcast immediately after that, talking about what other people did on stage to make sure that didn't happen. And you know, from other people, I've heard that it got really tense at a few points with Jeezy and Gucci, understandably so. This one, you know, it sort of reminds me of battle rap. You know, I don't follow battle rap terribly closely, but we all remember that, you know, that not meme, but that viral clip of the dude, every day I'm styling on you, and boom, he got smacked. You remember that from like 15 years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, it's bound to happen. And for the reasons you just said, based on testosterone. And it's funny because I was watching on my phone this Verzuz, and I didn't see the writing on the wall. I saw some great back and forth, some Gary Payton style, Kevin Garnett style shit talking. But it wasn't until I watched it again on YouTube, and obviously I know what's about to happen, that you can start to see where things change. And
what was that moment for you? What was that?
you know, one of the things that I didn't see on my phone, in the round before the altercation, I'll call it, I didn't see on my phone that DJ Paul and Gangsta Boo are ballroom dancing. I don't know if you even saw that.
No, that's that.
So, you know, their Bone Thugs-N-Harmony is performing Buddha Lovers, excuse me, you know, the smoke song, and they perform it as they did 2 or 3 times in the night, kind of like a street doo-wop quartet. Like they huddled up in a semicircle. And I thought it was really dope. Like I've never gotten to see Bone Thugs-N-Harmony live, but I mean, this group was harmonic, you know, is melodic. So to watch them perform that, you know, especially when you're dealing with so many microphones on stage, to watch them have a little bit of a tighter routine, I thought it was really cool. And at one point, you know, it was either Paul or Boo said, you know, I thought y'all brothers rap, you're an R&B group. And when they did that and they set up as a doo-wop group, they're over to the side. And I did not see this on my phone. I saw it. It's on the version on YouTube. They're dancing and making fun, and he's twirling her around, and they're slow dancing. Moments later, before starting the next, you know, song, that's when Bizzy comes over and says, "I will not have you mocking me." And, you know, again, it's one of those things. And I mean, we run into this, you know, time and time again in history right now with camera angles and context and all of this. You don't see. And I don't think that certainly warranted the ultimate outcome. But you actually, you know, spoke about something that Bizzy told Fat Joe in the post-fight or in the post-battle too, that I thought was interesting. Of it wasn't even that, it was Juicy J's response that escalated things even further.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So you're watching, and it's like 3 or 4 rounds in.
Yeah.
At that point, you know, I was pleasantly surprised by like how dope the back and forth was. You know, they were hitting each other with bombs. The energy was on 10, and it felt like a real hip hop moment, you know. And then to your point, Bizzy says that, and I thought it was weird. I thought he was just reacting generally because of the banter that was happening back and forth. But you know, it's interesting to now know that it's something specific. And as is the case with every fight, it's always the person who throws a second punch that gets in trouble. So all right, so you're in bed and you're watching this live.
Man, you had to tell everyone I was in bed.
I already told them I was in bed, man. I was asleep.
I started watching it in the kitchen. I was watching Thursday Night Football, and then I was like, no, this is more interesting. You know, this was more interesting. So I start watching, and you're right. The banter, and again, I want to say something that I saw in rewatching it that I didn't catch in the first part. As I'm tuning in and it's running late, I'll level with you. I'll level with all of our listeners. I'm immediately thinking Bizzy Bone. Like that is Bizzy's reputation. You know, and if you've listened over the years of some of the other members of Bone's frustration, you know, he has very much been the diva, for lack of a better word, of the group. Just, you know, I'm not satisfied with this. I'm not satisfied with that. Frequently didn't show up for concert dates, album runs, like screwed up the bag numerous times. When they come to the stage, and I don't believe Fat Joe. I mean, and Fat Joe says, I never tell a lie. I think Fat Joe looked out as a great mediator between these two groups. And maybe he was supposed to do the coin toss all along. But when you watch Fat Joe, he does not seem prepared to do that. I think he's a great MC, a master of ceremonies. And I think that he does a damn good job. But he wasn't even necessarily sure of who was all there.
Yeah.
But when they come to the stage, it's very interesting. There's a yellow caution tape as part of Bone Thugs' prop. And they both come in there, they get announced, you know, and they come to shake hands, and Bizzy walks away. He refuses to shake Bone Thugs, 3-6's hands before the battle even starts. And when you watch those first 3 or 4 rounds, Bizzy's standing off to the side. Something happened backstage. And I know we'll never, I mean, maybe years from now we'll get the story, but something was up before this thing ever started.
Well, I got some insight, at least Bizzy's perspective on that. But so you're lying in bed and
bringing it back to that.
And this unfold. What is your first thought? Because this is like the power of live, right? Because it's one thing for me to watch it on YouTube when I know it's coming, on a clip like you did in the article.
Yeah.
It's another thing to be watching it in the moment, and all of a sudden it goes completely left. So what were you thinking?
I said audibly, "Oh shit, they are fighting. This is crazy." And then I thought to myself, I got to get out of bed and we got to cover this. AFH has to cover this, which is a predicament that I've been in for like 20 years of my life, wherever I've worked. And
Unfortunately, it's typically due to death.
what'd you say?
I said, unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
typically due to death. So,
Yeah.
but so,
Yeah.
were you thinking, oh, it's about to be a wrap, like this is it, or?
Well, I mean, what happens, and they go to black, but it's still running on my phone. And an article was started, and we went from there. And then in real time, as the article is just about ready, um, not only do they come back, they do a couple more rounds. There's a gesture of peace, and we can talk about some of that. But as we're about to publish, Bizzy comes out and gives an apology. And I thought, man, this is so crazy. Like, you and I have lived in a time where albums drop at midnight now. A lot of things happen in real time, but the way Verzuz has affected culture, I mean, this reminds me of like the Grammy Awards. Like when something would happen and you're covering it in real time that way, it's all systems go. And this, one of the things when you talk about both groups having overlap, both of these groups in 2021 don't have the media love. This is a much less hyped battle in my estimation than Raekwon versus Ghostface. It just doesn't have the cachet of coastal media. These are two Midwest groups. These are groups that, while they've had love on the radio in the past, are not right now, especially as groups. Shout out to Juicy J. And I think that we found, you and I, time and time again, that an audience that follows these groups needs a home on the internet, and they're very much the same folks that care about a lot of the artists that we cover. So it is our duty, even in the capacity that AFH is in, to cover this. And you're absolutely right, and that's kind of what transpired. And then it was interesting to see how the rest of the night went. Now, full disclosure, I went to bed before the 20 rounds. I went to bed somewhere around like round 11. And then I got up and on Friday watched the rest of it. And,
Right.
and I made the right decision for sleep's sake, but an interesting verses.
All right, so Bone Thugs are performing. DJ Paul and Gangsta Boo are ballroom dancing. Shots are fired about them being an R&B group. Bizzy steps up to the yellow tape, the caution tape, which is serving as a divider between the two groups, and looks them dead in the face and says, y'all ugly mother effers is not about to mock me and be disrespectful to me. And DJ Paul says,
Juicy J says,
Juicy J says, suck my D.
Yeah.
Right? Bizzy then cocks back, throws his water bottle at them, and I gotta say it was like a 50 Cent, throwing the first pitch.
Yeah.
Does not have a career in baseball because like it hit the floor like before it got to Juicy, and Juicy was not far away. And then who charged? I know DJ Paul charged, but he didn't cross the line. But then like the rest of the crew charged, and they
Juicy went, and honestly, it's funny if you watch it in slow-mo. I believe, this is like the Kennedy, the frame by frame. I think Bizzy throws his mic first, and then it's a two-fister. Boom, one, then the other. And because when it's all said and done, unless he dropped his mic, he's empty-handed. And Juicy J is wearing sunglasses. They're all of a sudden gone as you're watching it. So either he chucked his glasses or he pulled them off, and he charges. And it's funny too, because, Juicy J, at least of the last 10 years, is the most successful person on that stage. I mean, he even, and the way he dressed, the jewelry, he let you know it. And he tore through, and he got through the line, and he pulls out his hand to hit Bizzy. And I don't think he really landed a punch. I think there was, contact, but he might have even hit lazy because Bizzy backs up. And then, as you see in every, melee of that kind, both crews collide. Security runs on. Steve LaBelle's out there. And, ultimately they separate the crews. And with that, Juicy J walks out of the stage. He was wearing the bright red, suit. And you see him around, and then he's out, and Bizzy Bone is just boom out. He's off stage, and
so it's a testament to the crews that they didn't get out of hand. You know, we
Yeah.
talked about issues of the crews, but actually it's the crews that I think saved this from getting really out of hand. And also, you know, Fat Joe made this point, and I agree with it. You know, a lot of times when that happens, you'll see when there's a fight on stage, you'll see fights start to break out in the crowd. I was actually at a Sugar Shane Mosley, Vernon Perry fight in Indianapolis back in the day.
Wow.
And a fight broke out behind us, and then like scattered fights started breaking out in the arena. It's like fights are contagious. So the fact that this one was contained was great. And then, you know, so there's a break. I hear.
Well, if I can add one thing though, too,
Okay.
you know, I saw some people in our story, the Facebook comments, you know, are really interesting. And some people have accused this of being a publicity stunt. I don't think so one single bit. Do you?
I don't. It didn't look like a publicity stunt to me. But who knows? Because in most situations like that, it does get out of hand and it does not resume.
Right.
But I think the counter argument to that is Verzuz is a gigantic platform. I'm pretty sure that people who participate are paid pretty handsomely. We know for
Yeah.
a fact that early participants got equity, and it would not shock me if there was a no fighting clause on there, and if you fight, you're going to lose your bag. So I think
Yeah.
that it was in everyone's best interest to resolve this and not like have that be the thing to define them on probably the biggest platform they'll ever be.
What's so interesting to me is when the fight happens, you know, and watching on Instagram, one thing I'll add, the camera angle sucked this episode. And Swizz was in the comments saying, you know, that is an enticement to subscribe to get better, you know, camera footage when you subscribe to, you know, Triller.
Yeah.
I have a theory, you know, one thing I'll say, and this is no shots at either group. This is just calling balls and strikes. There was a lot of lip syncing going on this battle. Like in the performances, not every MC, but there was a lot of oof. And I think they needed medium shot to just make that look a little bit better. So when the fight happens, Gangsta Boo, and you know, people might not realize Gangsta Boo's reputation was very antagonistic. Like that was part of her persona as a rapper. It's what makes her great. It's why, you know, Run the Jewels features her on their albums. It's she, you know, Gangsta Boo has in many ways become a timeless artist of that movement. And she was one of the better performers, you know, on Thursday night, in my opinion, on the 3-6 side. But she, you know, immediately accuses Bizzy Bone of fucking it up for everyone. And she made the comment of, you didn't take your pills. And, you know, out of respect to mental health and all of that, I don't want to play into that. That was very clearly a diss. You know, and then there were other people, and I can't attribute it to who, that said this is why he's not in the group.
Yeah.
You know, which I just thought was,
he's gonna fuck up your bag. He's gonna
right.
fuck up your group. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting because, you know, it's like, you know, I always think of that 96, you know, Van Halen with David Lee Roth at the VMAs. And there's that famous quote, I think it was from Eddie Van Halen, where he said he wanted to kick David Lee Roth right in the crotch if he ever spoke to him that way again. Like Verzuz, even as big and as celebratory as it is, these groups are bringing their baggage. And, you know, shout out, you know, there's this moment, they go to black, they run a commercial for some upcoming Verzuz boxing stuff. And I don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, I watched the Source Awards live, like the 99 Source Awards, where something similar happened and it ran on like UPN or something. And then they came back. And the one thing that I'll say too is, you know, and we're going to talk about it, shout out to what both groups did once they came back. But the sad part is when this resumed, the people on the stage had like tripled. And I really think that cost the performance. And I'm sure there were huge security measures, probably of people on stage concerned about the fans. This was at the Hollywood Palladium, but the level of performance never quite got back. But yeah, it was, I think the outage was less than 10 minutes, which was astounding.
That's amazing. So yeah, break down like the apologies that were said right after, and then I'll get into like what happened after the event, because both Bizzy and DJ Paul joined Fat Joe to kind of give kind of post versus remarks on what happened.
Yeah, so you know it's interesting. They come back and 3-6 Mafia does a song. I'll say the title "Ass and Titties," which I'm very curious. You know,
which has the words "suck my D" in it.
Word, which I didn't consider. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah. Right.
And
So did they switch it around, or is our person on Facebook like, Nostradamus?
it's interesting too because when this battle began, 3-6, and they had to perform first because of the coin flip, and they did "Who Run It," and they were doing ad libs of "Who Run It," not you. Like both groups were the level of shit talking, as you said, was just incredible. So the fact they come out, did that song. A lot of times they were lining up their songs really well. This is a battle I do think Swizz or Timberland, more likely Swizz given his proxy, certainly to 3-6. I think they really came with a dope sequence of songs. Oftentimes they would go year for year or like big feature record, big remix record. So, after they do that record, Paul says that's one thing we can all agree that we like, or two things, which was the beginning of an olive branch. And then boom, Bone Thugs-N-Harmony cuts into Days of Our Lives, which is my favorite Bone Thugs-N-Harmony song, which in some weird way is poetic of like, man, this is another day in a life. Like, and it really set the tone. So a couple rounds go by, and then after round 7, Bizzy Bone comes back to the stage, and this is what he says: "I want to apologize to everyone out there on both sides. I'm not trying to fuck this shit up. Pardon me." And he's there and daps it up in a very meaningful way, with Juicy J, and stays on stage. And it's interesting. Again, is this a publicity stunt? I rewatched that, and I'm watching Steve LaBelle, who's Bone Thugs-N-Harmony's, manager. He's been with the group since the Ruthless days. I'm watching him walk Bizzy out to the center, and I'm watching the consternation on his face. This was not scripted. I mean, this may be antics, but they're still worried at any point that this can get even sloppier.
Yeah, and those remarks that you mentioned that were made about Bizzy as the altercation was happening, that doesn't sound scripted to me. That's real talk, and said by people who are really just kind of disgusted about what went down. So, okay, so afterwards, Fat Joe does his recap, and he has both Bizzy and DJ Paul come on, and I'll say this: DJ Paul tells Fat Joe, "I love Bizzy Bone. I love him to death. I could not ever see myself putting my hands on them. I love all of Bone to death. I'm a fan. We can't keep hip hop thinking that we're enemies of each other." So he goes out of his way to like make that point, which I thought was really dope and really telling. And I suspect that also he was lamenting doing that on the Verzuz platform, because I got to believe these guys have respect for what Swizz and Tim have built, and so many people have done this for the culture. They understand what it means, and so to do that, it's just not cool. So then Bizzy comes on, and he talks about it a lot more extensively. So he, to your point earlier about him not being kind of in the right mind state when he was on the stage early. He says that he had caught a cold from his son, a few days ago, and it was like a really, really terrible cold. He was super congested. His head was all messed up. And so when he arrived, he was not ready for any kind of banter. And he says that, when he said what he said, he was actually trying to like provide the banter that, he's seen in the Jadakiss and in the Locks and Dipset and stuff like that, which kind of goes against your ballroom dancing thing, but also he might have been scripting this afterwards to like kind of come. But he says, so he gives him the banter, and he says, and when he called them ugly motherfuckers, although when I watched it back again too, he looked dead up serious. He didn't look like it was banter.
Yeah.
He didn't look like he was joking and like trying to. He was like, y'all not about to disrespect me. He seemed almost like Birdman to me in the Breakfast Club altercation. But so he goes, he said he expected a retort. He expected them to say, shut the fuck up, or who you calling ugly, something along those lines. But he thought, suck my D was over the line. Fat Joe also said, listen, those are fighting words in most circles. And so because of that, he thought that they took it to a place that's not right, and the streets know that. And so that's why he had the reaction he did. He said his soul made his body react. That's a quote from him. and he didn't think before he was acting. It was just instinctual for him. And that made me think about if it was true that he was trying to continue the banter. It's a lot like the Royce and Lupe podcast that you and I did, where it's like a game of slap boxing, and inevitably slap boxing goes wrong when one person gets hit in the ear or whatever, and like the stakes raise. So if that was the case, that's the time when somebody got hit in the ear. He said that he was off stage and he heard the crowd calling for him to come back. And then his son had also called him and told him that he needed to go back on. And so that's why he came back. And he said, when I came back, I felt like as a man and as a business person and as an adult, I wanted to make sure that I apologized to their whole side, because they did what they were supposed to do. And my side did what they were supposed to do. And I wanted the fans to understand I'm not trying to fuck nothing up. So then after that, I called Juicy J over. I said, come here, and we said a little something. I'll keep that between us. But as it went on, it was respect on the floor. And I was able to ease up a little bit, nod my head to some of their shit, because I understand that as we were getting to the end, all this had to end with Crossroads and us linking up and shaking hands. I knew that before I walked in. I already knew the plan. And then he says, we wanted to make sure that we were able to say rest in peace to somebody that came from Memphis, Young Dolph. They wanted to, honor Young Dolph and then come together and bring it all together. It was a very strategic plan. So, that's why he says that they ended with Crossroads and they had that kind of kumbaya moment at the end. That was all planned, and so I'm glad they were able to do that. But it didn't feel scripted to me, but it was definitely thought out. So who knows, man? Who knows?
One of the things that I learned after I saw the fight, I saw it on Twitter. Verzuz has now gotten in the habit of getting its participants to do some like pre-game, pre-fight, smack talk. And Bizzy put out a video this week, and it's on Twitter, and he told Bone Thugs, "I'm finna fuck you devil worshiping brothers the fuck up," which cracked me up. I mean, like, again, like I think of the Fat Joe Ja Rule verses, and these guys, made a hit record together with New York, and they took playful jabs at each other. I mean, jabs that, like, if your friend says it about you, like, you might wake up the next day with that thing on your mind. But this one, I mean, the level of smack talk was too far. And it reminds me of sports. Like, there was a lot of chin music, and you can see why the mound was charged. That doesn't mean Bizzy Bone was in the right. But this one, the jabs, I mean, they're questioning each other's hits. At one point, I think Lazy Bone tells, this is before the fight, she tells Gangsta Boo, come over here, let me fix your braids. Like, I mean, it was just good quality, smack talk, but it escalated. And, I think you're absolutely right. We're not living in the era where people want to, while we all might click in and tune in, hip hop, I mean, shout out to our leaders. This is the grown person era of like using an event like this to make peace, to do the Crossroads at the end. And it marred things. And I was actually conflicted on how we covered the story, because we've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years just about covering Verzuz and its merits. And does one fight, like, does that become the bigger takeaway this year than all that the Locks did? I hope not. And now we know not. But it's just an interesting question of maturity.
Yeah, and that's also why I don't think it was scripted, because people don't remember the piece, they remember the fight. And there is no way that altercation in any way helped the brand of Verzuz. Swizz and Tim are trying to build something, Triller's trying to build something. And the minute you start to do that, you start to have insurance problems. It takes down sponsorships. No sponsor wants to be attached to that. It gets to, a world star place, and people don't want to stand next to that content. And so if it was scripted, it was like a Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake thing where they did it behind the scenes and didn't tell the broadcaster, because I can't see Swizz and Tim co-signing something like that. It just was not a good look for their brand. And so let's assume that it wasn't scripted. And that being the case, then I think that it makes what they were able to do afterwards even more powerful, because it could have easily escalated, it could have shut down, but the other members came, they finished it out. Bizzy came back, made his apologies, and then that crossroads moment was a moment. Like that song transcended hip hop, it transcended like genre, and it transcended like radio, and became a universal theme song for people who have lost someone. And
Yeah.
to see that moment, and to see Tupac and Eazy-E and Biggie and Young Dolph and Nipsey Hussle and Virgil Abloh, who we just lost last week, on that screen, while those guys are all together on stage in the dark, with lighters and Crossroads playing, that was a moment. That was a moment, and to me, that's the moment that should be celebrated, and the one that should the ultimate legacy for this Verzuz. And that's why I wanted us, and I'm glad we decided to kind of like focus on it in that way.
Absolutely, and very well said. Were there any other highlights or takeaways that stood out to you from the night?
Yeah, I was surprised that Juicy J did a Katy Perry feature. That's not like something that it's a huge verse for him, but not like what you would think would be a Verge's moment. The other thing was an omission, first of the month, and part of me thinks that that's something that got lost in the shuffle or in the scuffle. The fact that Bone didn't play first of the month, probably their second biggest hit, was really surprising to me. Aside from that, I think my biggest surprise was just how much I enjoyed the music. Because as again, as a person coming into it, not a huge fan of either, and really not knowing 360's catalog the way that I know a lot of other artists, to have enjoyed it as much as I did musically was a welcome surprise for me. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I had some surprising takeaways. I've always attributed Crazy Bone to the de facto leader of Bone Thugs-N-Harmony, and I think we saw on Thursday night, at the moment right now, that it's Lazy. Lazy was the spokesman for the group. He had some great interplay, and really knew the balance of banter. I thought Bizzy, to his credit, was one of the strongest performers on stage on the Bone side. There were several points with Wish and with Crazy, and even Lazy at a few points where I think they were just straight syncing to their raps. I do think when it came to some of the harmonies, the mics were live. For better in Bizzy and Lazy's case, and maybe for worse in Wish's case. Some of that was interesting. I thought Crunchy Black was a dope hype man. Like the dancing, the way he kept the energy. I think the crowd was very, very, very favoritist towards Bone. And obviously, Bone has LA history. Ruthless was a LA label. Their ties to Eazy-E, their ties to Tupac. Bone has a lot of love out there. Not that 3-6 doesn't. I mean, I think one of the VH1 shows that Paul and Juicy J did showed them in Hollywood. But that crowd, and Justin Hunt texted us as much, like, yo, this crowd is going crazy for Bone. That was key takeaways. I don't think in this particular battle the guests offered a whole lot. I mean, through the night we got Lil Wayne, which you and I are just mentioning now. I mean, the fact that Wayne came out was huge. I thought Wayne immediately hit the stage, bowed to Bone Thugs-N-Harmony, which I thought was really dope, and then did the Bands Will Make Her Dance verse. We had Wiz Khalifa. It was really cool to me, just as a fan, that Bone Thugs brought out DJ Unique. They brought out Kenny McLeod on the talk box, which was probably my favorite guest when he did No Surrender. Like, I thought that was so dope. Like, they got the first round for me on that one.
A Lil Jon for me, I thought Lil Jon like turned it all the way up too. I wouldn't say that they didn't have impact. It's just that they didn't overshadow it. I thought that each one brought energy, but it was just like one and done. They didn't do, in the past we've seen them, do some of their own songs and stuff like that. They were just truly there to be supporting cast, which I thought was appropriate.
Yeah, Chameleonaire. There was a host of people. Actually, one of my favorite guests too was Shatasha Williams on Thuggish Ruggish Bone, and I was looking into her, and Complex actually did a dope article 6 years ago. She was somebody that was completely there was even a fake death report. She sang on the original, had worked with had worked with Candyman and all of that. The fact that they got her, that's the stuff I like about Verzuz. We got Terrence Howard out there. Little John, Project Pat. It was interesting. I'm in a way, like you mentioned the Katy Perry record, which made sense to me, especially when they played it against the Mariah Carey Bone Thugs joint. But I'm laughing. I don't expect to see Mariah, but Katy Perry is somebody who's used hip hop culture and rap music a lot. It was done in LA. Katy Perry could have come out if Lil Wayne's there, but neither here nor there.
That's crazy.
Overall, did you have a, it doesn't need to be, a total tally. I have one, but did you have a winner?
Fat Joe said something, I agree with it. I thought that the energy went down for Bone once the Bizzy incident happened, and that could have been, and 3-6 didn't have any guilt, so they didn't have to take their energy down. They kept coming with it. I thought when we talk about these, it's so often about the performance more than the record. And I thought that every single time 3-6 did something, it was turned up. And Bone, just by nature of their catalog, they got like Janet Jackson samples and like super melodic, like slow, like R&B, Quiet Storm kind of stuff. So it's really hard to compete with that. Puff was joking with Jermaine Dupri. He's like, what are you gonna do with Biggie? Like, you're gonna like play Mariah Carey? Like, like, dog, this is a hip hop joint, and you could. And so I think that was an advantage that 3-6 had, was just the level of energy they had. So I think overall I would have given it to, and them not playing first of the month too was also a tough one for Bone. So surprisingly, I probably would have given it to 3-6. I like the Bone records that I like more than the 3-6 records generally, but there was a lot of Bone records that were just okay to me, and every 3-6 joint was like kind of on 10 in terms of energy. How about you?
That's so interesting. I came into this expecting 3-6 to win, not by a strong margin, but I have it as Bone 12-8. And, this one, there were certain things that, the stage charisma on both sides that gave, edge ups to rounds. But I thought it was really about record selection. And this one was set up nicely. But in the end, I mean, Bone came in, 3-6 started reverting to some Juicy J mixtape stuff from 2011. They didn't do any DJ Paul solo records, which I thought was interesting. It was very much Juicy J leaning. They used Project Pat with Chicken Head at one point, and he came out and did his Knife Talk verse from Drake's new album. But yeah, I mean, it was a close battle, but I have Bone winning 12-8. And that last round is tricky. 3-6 did a song. They did one of their best songs, Slob on My Knob, but nothing. I mean, Crossroads is the the ace of spades. That's gonna win.
Yeah, it's just the big joker for sure. Yeah, so we touched on it, but we had another loss. This one wasn't. Virgil Abloh passed away, and this was a huge surprise for me. I was actually in Philadelphia, having just visited you when you texted. It came out of nowhere for me. We later learned that he had been dealing with cancer for 2 years. This one hit me kind of like Chad Boseman, in that, you had no idea, and they're not, fortunately, in a situation where there's expected to be violence, or a situation where they're known to have been abusing drugs or anything like that. So there was no warning for it, and so young at age 40, I believe, or 41.
41. Yeah.
41, yeah. And and also for a person who was so supremely talented, and was like that path was cut short, and he still had a lot of upward motion. For those who don't know, Virgil Abloh was the creative director for Donda, Kanye West's fashion line, and then went on to start his own Off-White label, and ultimately became the creative director for menswear for Louis Vuitton, which is just gigantic. Bernard Arnault, who Kanye references a lot. People talk about tech titans like Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, but Bernard Arnault, I believe, is number 3 on that list.
Wow.
In terms of wealth, he's like $150 billion or something like that. and the old school way through, like, tangible goods, Louis Vuitton, Moet and Hennessy. So he's got clothes and alcohol. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, the main, the high fashion Diddy. Diddy is, with Sean John and the Ciroc stuff, like, had a very similar kind of like arc, as did Jay with his liquor brands and clothing. So Bernard Arnault may be the blueprint for all these people, and Kanye has always made it very clear. And for Virgil to be, running one of the main lines of his business, or at least the chief creative person for that, you could see, him potentially reaching those heights. And so it was a real loss for me. But you put together a great piece about his other connections to hip hop. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, and I've come to realize even more, what he did. And what's interesting is, he and Kanye West interned together at Fendi in 2009. I mean, Kanye is well into his career. Virgil had opened up a brick and mortar in Chicago with Don C, who a lot of people may know has been, Kanye's partner and manager throughout much of his career. But he was brought in. He designed the cover for Watch the Throne, and was an artistic director throughout that album. I think he had input on some of the visuals, on the music video side. And he's come in recently to do stuff that we cover. West Side Gun's Pray for Paris album, designed the artwork for that. Had worked closely with Griselda. People may remember the Dr. Bird single, from the Shady album, and the chorus is, tell Virgil write brick on my brick. And that was a call out. And from what I understand, what I've seen West Side Gun say, Virgil was a ground floor supporter, of the mid 2010s, before Griselda, was signed to Shady, when they're just kind of this Buffalo group that's treating its music like high fashion, like limited edition couture fashion. Virgil was a fan. I mean, he was a DJ, was somebody that was very much in and around the culture. Did you ever meet him?
I did not. No.
Me neither. But it was interesting. He was somebody that, I'm familiar with. We covered his story previously when Louis Vuitton made that appointment. I mean, he became the, first Black creative director, was somebody that was kicking down doors and boundaries. I was in Paris last month and walked by the Parisian office for LV. And, I said to my girl, like, Virgil Abloh, she knew who he was. And I was like, I wonder if that's where he goes to work a lot of the time. So, somebody that's very much in the consciousness. And from all that I've seen in the aftermath of his passing, was just such a positive force to so many of the people that we listen to and cover. And it's just one more of devastating reminder in 2021 of, health is wealth, and treat people with care and love while they're here.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's actually a perfect segue, because last night I attended a screening, a premiere for a documentary about Ralph McDaniels and Video Music Box. It's called You're Now Watching Video Music Box, and was produced by Mass Appeal, the company that Nas has a stake in, and also Uncle Ralph Productions. And it was at the Harlem Magic Johnson Theater, which was great. And it was like a who's who of people from that era. I sat directly behind Slick Rick and Grandmaster Caz, and I got the photo receipts to prove it. Crazy Legs was in the building, of course, Uncle Ralph. Nas was sitting right in front of us, like maybe 2 seats down. It was a lot of legends in the building, and there were some technical difficulties. The video was out of sync, and it was some starts and stops, but it didn't matter because the documentary was so great, and the crowd was really rooting for it. And it truly told the story of Ralph and how he rose, and what he had to do, the fight he had to make to get Video Music Box on the air, and the background that he had with his family, and people having cameras that allowed him to be one of the first people to think about, I should take a camera and capture this kind of stuff. This is way before phones or even camcorders. He had
1983.
the big lights and everything, so it was a big production to be able to do that. So there's a reason why this stuff wasn't documented. And, many of the incredible classic clips that we've showcased that many have seen, even like the joint where Nas is like freestyling and your man is like wiping his face and stuff. You know, Biggie and Method Man on stage, like just all sorts of stuff that we would have never seen were it not for Video Music Box, and it was the precursor to Yo MTV Raps and Rap City, and you know, like so many other stories, it tells a tale of a black entrepreneur who was a pioneer in something, and ultimately didn't get the big payday that you would expect for the impact that he has, but his legacy lives on, and he's Uncle Ralph. And without him, there would be no Puff, there would be no Jay, there would be no Eminem and Tupac and all these people. And you see that in the footage, and many of those people are actually featured in the film too. It's outstanding. On Showtime, and I highly recommend everyone watch it. It is the first of three that Mass Appeal is putting together to celebrate the 50th anniversary of hip hop, which is coming up. They've also got a dope like exhibit. Personal highlight for me, my son, 17 years old. His favorite album is Illmatic. He's got the quote, "The world is yours" in his yearbook. In honor of Nas, I was able to get him, a quick, hello with Nas and a great picture. So yeah, man, great night, great way to end the week. But Ralph McDaniels, someone getting his flowers, and he's gotten his flowers a number of times, but this is a real like lasting legacy to a living legend, and so it was great to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I think this film is a step in the right direction. Ralph has incredible archives. I mean, we've gotten to work with Ralph, and I believe that Ralph, after all of the years of sweat and sacrifice and hard work, I think that Ralph will the best is yet to come for what he's done for the culture. I truly believe that, and what a dedicated, great individual. And yeah, I shout out to Showtime and Mass Appeal. I'm eager to tune in.
Yeah, and also a lot of community service. He has prided himself on doing both entertaining, but also educating and helping raise people. And the film highlights that too, and he still continues to do that work to this day. So,
did they talk much about the music videos? Like, I know Ralph did stuff for Black Moon and Gangstar and us.
well, it's all there, man. The
Yeah,
whole
word.
story is there. It's really dope.
Yeah.
I think anyone who rocks with AFH will appreciate that. My son, again, is 17 and didn't know probably 95% of the participants in the documentary. Still came away kind of blown away and understanding the impact that Ralph has had.
Man, I love that. Well, as we close it down, any new music you've heard this week of note?
Yeah, not a ton out that I peeped, but the Nick Grant, which you put me on, Carolina Diaries, just a 4-song EP. Huge fan of Nick. We had him perform at our South by Southwest showcase back in the day. I put him in the back room, I believe. I've always been a huge fan of Nick Grant, and still think that he's got like a come up coming. So that was dope, and I got to dig into it a little bit more. How about you?
Yeah, you put Automatic on the playlist. It's a 4-pack. Carolina Diaries. I've been heavy duty rotation on that. Mach-Hommy put out a new album. No surprise there. I mean, one of the most prolific guys, just like West Side Gun. 2 projects I'll just quickly
Yeah, where
spotlight.
is that Mach-Hommy? I saw a story about it, but I looked on Apple and Spotify, and I wasn't able to find it.
Oh, it's on Spotify. I listened today, and yeah, man, I really enjoyed it. Nicholas Craven, who we've talked about a couple times here, has done a lot of the stuff with Ransom this year and Rome Streets and Droog, produces a bulk of it. It's like less than half an hour, but it moves really smoothly. And it closes with a song that you will really appreciate. I think it's called Love Self, like Love Self. And it's all about really what we just talked about. Health is wealth, and how he really looks at his physical, his mental, his spiritual differently, and I'm sure that what we've seen in 2021 in the hip-hop space has a lot to do with that. I liked it. There's some joints. Yeah, check it out, let me know what you think.
Yeah.
Because I think he's going to be somebody we talk about very soon as we kind of look back at 2021. Two other projects that I'll shout out. We talk a lot about Wu-Tang on here. There's the Collective Family Tree, and I want to give a shout out to Remedy, who people may remember. I mean, Remedy went to high school with a lot of the Wu, like Meth, Inspector Deck, I believe, Staten Island guy. A lot of people may remember, from the late '90s. He was the white dude in the crew. But more than that, I mean, Remedy has made. We're still, closing down Hanukkah right now, and Remedy made one of the most important records, I think, as far as Judaism. He made the Hip Hop Holocaust record, Never Forget, which was on the Wu-Tang Killer Bees album, Gold album in '97. And he's very much become a behind the scenes dude with Wu. He's put out a lot of the records we've seen with Inspector Deck and Capadonna, but he put out a joint called Remedy Meets Wu-Tang. And it's got a lot of the Wu brothers on it. And I mean, this is a year where, I mean, obviously, the guys have been busy, working with the series and that, and there have been some great individual songs, but there haven't been huge albums. I mean, obviously Deck did a new Czarface, but what's cool about this is he's got RZA involved, he's got Meth, he's got Ghost, Capadonna, Master Killer, and then other guys, Conway the Machine. I really encourage people to check that out if you're a Wu-Tang fan. There's a joint on there called Crazy Eights with Meth, Ghost, Deck, Master Killer, Capadonna, Solomon Childs, and Street Life. And to me, I mean, we've had some cool individual cuts this year, but that's one of the best like Wu Posse records. So I want to give an acknowledgement there. And being that I'm in Philadelphia today, I want to give a shout out to another artist that I often feel doesn't get the media love he deserves, and that's Reef The Lost Cauze. We've covered Reef on AFH. He's done incredible things with Sean Price, RIP, Snow Goons. He's part of Army of the Pharaohs, AOTP, and which was the Jedi Mind Tricks offshoot. But he put out an album. It's only on Bandcamp and YouTube, called Reef The Lost Cauze is Alive. And I've been playing that a lot. It's kind of a mixtape with some familiar beats. I'm not going to sample snitch over here, but he's got a joint called Ain't No Angels and another joint called Look at Me Go, the final two songs on the album. They have stuck to my ribs. And I often tell people, I mean, Reef, when I look at Philly MCs, Reef is absolutely in my top 10 of all time, damn near my top 5, and absolutely 100% top 5 Philly performers. And this is a hard city to perform hip hop in. I mean, this is the city that Black Thought cut his teeth in, Schoolie D, Freeway and Beans. And if you've ever seen Reef on stage, I don't care if he's opening or he's the headliner, he will make you a massive fan. And I will always, plant a flag and raise my voice on his behalf. So I encourage everyone to check that out. And then just one other joint that I learned existed. I played it through one time, not enough to comment on it. Styles P and Havoc, a Locks Mobb Deep connection. They made an album together called Wreckage Manor, produced by Havoc. And shout out to Hav. He was our very first guest on this show, and one of my favorite episodes. We got to talk to him about the 25th anniversary of the Infamous. So if you're new to this podcast, man, check that one out. That's a special conversation.
Word. And since you mentioned the Wu Posse cut, I also will talk about Paige Kennedy. Paige Kennedy, a lot of people may know as an actor. He was in a film called The Meg, which was a shark film, but also U-Turn on the show Weeds, Showtime also, with Mary Louise Parker. Really memorable character on there. But Paige, for the last several years, has really been also very passionate about his rap career, and has been a friend to AFH, another person who performed on our South by Southwest showcase that same year that Nick Grant did.
Tore it down.
Yeah, from Detroit, so really it prides himself on true lyricism, is down with Els High and Royce, and really a part of that crew. And he can rap his ass off. And so, he put out a mixtape, and the final song is Grand Finale 2021. And it's a remake of the DOC's song, The Grand Finale, featuring Eazy-E, Ice Cube, Ren, and the DOC. And that was one of my favorite posse cuts ever. Eazy and Ice Cube's verses were just insane and quotable. They said stuff that was up there with Nas's, his verse from Live at the Barbecue.
Punchlines.
I can't even say them. They're so controversial. But this one features Royce, who's only hosting. You know, he just kind of tease up the.
Which is what Dre did on the original, right?
Yeah, exactly. So tease up the participants, and then it's Paige, My Son, Graph, 3D Nati, Ransom, who's we've talked about his recent album with Rome Streets is incredible. Locksmith, and then King Crooked, formerly known as Crooked Eye, and everyone does their thing. In my opinion, Crooked and Page just absolutely black out. But that's a cool listen, and it's on the Ambrosia for Heads playlist on Spotify, so check that out. But with that being said, what's your song of the week?
Yo, man, I'll give it to Reef. I'll go with the Look at Me Now joint or Look at Me Go joint. He says a lot in that, and that's been heavy duty rotation. What about you?
I'm gonna go with Nas's One Love, but the Cook and Soul remix. Cook and Soul put out a project where they remixed a bunch of Illmatic songs a few years ago, and they did so with soul samples. And the One Love joint. So One Love, I know not your favorite on Illmatic. It's actually one of my favorites. I love Q-Tip's beat on it. But this is such a wildly different reinvention of it, and but it just fits so well, and it feels like Nas wrote the beat in the actual studio. But I encourage everyone to check that one out. It's on YouTube. But One Love Cook 'Em Soul remix. So.
Yeah, before you get me killed out here too, I think Q-Tip's beat is dope. I think Nas's verse is dope. I've never really loved Where It Lives in Illmatic, and I obviously hold Illmatic in the highest regard. What I like about this remix is it kind of reminds me of G-Rap and Nas Fast Life. They inject some melody and a totally different take on the record. And yeah, I was not I'm a Cook and Soul fan. I wasn't up on that one until I think you sent it to me a while back, and then you sent it again this week. But it actually sent me down a rabbit hole. And they recently put out an album of them kind of paying homage to Doom that's on all the DSPs. And if you aren't up on Cook and Soul, you need to be. And that was a great reminder for me.
Didn't you say that All Eyes on Me is the only album more overrated than Illmatic?
Yo,
I gotta agree. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put a hit out on
that
you.
is not true. That is not true. Yeah, dear world, I get enough hate lately. Nah, man, but that's cool. And shout out too. It's funny. One of our readers said on our last episode, they're like, "Yo, the new music, you didn't talk about the Page joint, but then I saw it on your playlist." And I love the fact that people, care that much and pay that much attention. It's comments like that are why we do it and why we just take this thing so seriously. I did my Spotify Wrapped, and this podcast is the most podcast I've listened to all year. So I do care about the playback too.
You're not only a member, you're a fan.
Hair Club for Men. Yeah.
Shout out to that person. That's really dope. We appreciate anyone who has made it this far and continues to support. So next time, man, much appreciated.
Likewise, man. Until we do it again. And RIP Virgil.
Word. Peace.